Nice. Hi. I guess I'll just kick us off if we're all ready. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is the first of many MAB Connect trainings to come. This time, we're going to look into conference budgets and finance issues. My name is Uni Multbach. I'm the community director here at Manners Across Borders. I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Ciara, who will be doing the actual training with us. Just a little practicality, this session is recorded, just so you know. For the benefit of those who can't be here today, it'll be uploaded to our website later at some point. I think that's all I wanted to say. So thank you again for joining, and I'll give the mic over to Ciara.
Great. Thank you very much, Uni. And thank you very much to the rest of the MAB team who have supported us and continue to support us on this call. My name is Ciara Campbell, and I'm the Training and Resources Officer for Manners Across Borders. And it's my pleasure to host the first training session of this term, which is on conference finance and budgeting for your model simulation. So just some disclaimers, first of all. This is not intended to be legal advice in any way. So there's no legal liability for any errors contained. It's meant to be a general guide and a way to get you started on your journey of finance and budgeting. There's also more written resources in the Slack, so please join the Manners Across Borders Slack if you have not, where you can gain access to all of our training resources and the recorded videos, which will be uploaded later on. So thank you very much. I will now share my screen. Okay, great. Okay, can someone give me verbal confirmation that they can see my screen?
Verbal confirmation
Yes.
that I can see your screen.
Thank you very much.
Yes, it's seeable.
Okay, right, perfect. Great. Everyone can see my screen. So, to just introduce myself for a little bit, my name is Ciara Campbell, and I am an Irish working professional based in Dublin. As previously said, I'm the Training and Resources Officer, but I started off my model simulation career in Model EU spaces, where I was a participant at many conferences and eventually became commissioner to quite a few. So I've been involved both as a participant and an organizer. And in other spaces as well, I've helped to do the financial organization of some conferences. So I'm here today to share with you my experience and do this training for you. So this is the introduction. So every conference will require financial decisions. And to ensure the success of your model simulation, this guide will take you through the basics of conference financing and budgeting. What we're going to discuss is the first step, which is creating a financial strategy. Then we're going to discuss creating a budget. And then we're going to discuss sponsorship and then other considerations of the legal and voluntary nature. But the first of all question you might have is, what makes a model simulation different from other events? And to that, my answer is the variability. A model simulation can take place at a high school after-school club. It can take place as a university event hosted domestically for students from all across the country. It can also take place as an international conference with participants from all over the world. So there's a great variability in scope, and that really affects the financial decisions you'll have to make. But that's the great thing about model simulations. They're a simulation of international institutions at places of decision making, and that means you can have a model simulation of Model NATO, Model EU, Model UN, Model African Union, so many different types. And that's what's led us all here today. Now, why does a conference need a budget, you might be asking? And that's really to ensure the success of your model simulation, because if you don't have a budget, then you might not be able to stick to the scope, and things might get wildly out of proportion. And that means your conference might actually not be able to come to fruition. You might not be able to achieve your dreams and see them in reality. You might not be able to actually book that venue, book those catering, book those speakers, have all the little labels and everything, if you haven't had a budget and a plan. So let's talk about a plan. Step 1, creating a financial strategy. And this is really key to the entire prospect of your model simulation. So the financial strategy should be almost a year-long process before you actually plan for your conference to take place. And the first step within creating a financial strategy is the idea and the conception for the conference. As I've noticed before, a model simulation can really vary in the scope. So it's at the idea and conception stage where you define that scope. It also depends if this is like your first time ever creating this model simulation, or if it's a very long and established model simulation. For example, there's a Model EU in Strasbourg, which has been going for many, many years. And so they have the long history and experience to look back on where they held it and how it was done before. Versus if you're creating a Model EU, say, in Dublin, which is where I'm based, there's no record of having done that before, to my knowledge at least. So the idea and conception would have to be done from scratch. So those are two very different things. But it also depends, are you at the idea and conception phase? Are you planning to hold it in the national legislature? Or are you planning to hold it in a privately held venue, like such as a hotel? Or are you planning to hold it in university halls? So all three of those require very different financial budgets, which is why it's so essential to have your conception and idea pinned down. It also depends if at the idea phase, you might have certain themes you want to play into. For example, you might want to discuss policies relating to the environment or sustainability. In that case, you might want sponsors which are more about the environment. Or your ideas and themes might be more about, say, international trade. In that case, there might be specific areas or places that you want to visit during your conference. So during the idea and conception, all of these will feed into the budget and how to make your ideas come into reality. So that's the idea stage. Step 2 is a planning stage. And that's when you're doing all of your research, planning everything out, and then also outreaching to sponsors, which we will delve into later on. And this is also the stage where you create your budget and nail it down. So those are the ideas, conception, and planning stages. The third stage is recruitment of participants, which is where you're going to receive the participant fee. You're going to estimate the cost for how many participants you have, because also the budget you have will be determined by how many participants you have. If you have a 50 participant conference, it's very different from having a 500 participant conference. So that also impacts on the whole overall budget of the conference. So number 3 and 4, they're about recruitment, preparation. You're going to be booking the venues and you're going to be paying any kind of costs you might need to, such as catering, accommodation, restaurants. Those are kind of the execution. The 5th one is the most delightful one of the entire conference for the participants, and maybe the most stressful one for the organizers, including the financial officer. Because if anything goes wrong during the conference, you'll have to have emergency funding to be able to pay for any problems that might crop up, such as, say, your IT, your audio-visual system breaks down. Say there's a massive problem with the accommodation and you have to have people rebooked in a room. So you have to have emergency budgets to prepare for all of these scenarios. And then post 6 is also a really important part of the whole strategy in the process. It's the post-conference wrap-up and review. So you have to submit all your receipts, have everything paid for, finalize your budget, check, did we go over budget? Are we under budget? Did this cost more? Did this cost less? And review it and file it away. And then this will also be future experience for next year's organizers to take from and learn from. So it's really essential to have everything wrapped up, and that the day after the conference, the organizers just don't run off, but everyone organizes and comes together and has it all sealed and parted and sealed and done before everyone parts ways. Step 2, creating a budget. So this is one of the most crucial aspects, but it may seem, like, oh man, a budget, that is a bit very technical and organized, but as an organization, that's what you have to do. So the process for creating a budget is, first of all, really pinning down your expenses, your revenue, your cash flow, and that's going to depend on, say, if you're already established, you might already have some funds before. But also, how are you going to get funds from places? Is it going to be from the participants fee? Is it going to be from sponsorships? Are there existing sponsorships that you already have? So analyzing all of this, defining your scope will be really crucial. And then so you acknowledge expenses, you create an event budget sheet, and you list the event requirements of all the costs that you believe you're going to have to spend, you estimate. And then you continuously update as you do spend money in the process of planning your conference. It's really essential to continue to track this for every single cost, and that it's a continuous process for the entire organization, planning, preparation, and execution. Because you don't want anyone to forget and then they misplace any receipts, or they can't remember what they've paid for, and then there's a loss in your budget which is completely unexplained and no one knows where it came from. So my tips for you are to, number 1, overestimate the costs. This is essential. Just always assume you're going to spend more, and then if it does cost more than you had actually anticipated, you're ready for that. The second one is a skill you might see commonly in jobs, after graduation, if you're a student, or in very large firms or government organizations, which is to obtain free quotes for every large expense. And so this means that 1, you're going with the cheapest option, but 2, it proves that you've looked around at the alternatives. And that's a part of financial ethics, that you're not just going with one source just because maybe you know them, or maybe there's some kind of favoritism. However, there may be that you're getting a better deal with an organization because of previously held connections, but it's also really, really important to just have a look at the market and see if there's any other cheaper alternatives or ones that would be better for you. The third tip is to reserve a fund for emergencies during the conference. As we spoke about before, you never know what might happen, and it's really essential that the organization has these funds, because you don't want any of the organizers to have to pay for this out of pocket, because it's very unlikely then that they will be reimbursed, and you don't want anyone to have to take that loss. So making sure the organization has that emergency fund is really essential. And then also in the planning stages, when you're still kind of considering your scope, it might be a good idea to draft several budgets for different income scenarios. It could be that you're estimating far more than what you're actually capable of getting income for. So you might want to say, oh, I really want to host this 2,000 person conference, and we're going to get people from all over the world. And then you look at your income stream, and maybe you can't get the income that would be required to support such a conference. So you say, okay, let's do something smaller, such as 500 people. And that might be more manageable for the income that you have. So in that kind of way, it's important to be flexible. So this is an example of a budget template, and it also has a little example of a receipt. So for example, the budget template really talks about your income. So you might have to be registering all the participant fees and how much they've cost and what revenue that is being raised for you. It might be from the exhibitors or the sponsorships, what kind of cash that they are paying into you. And that's how to track your income. And then what you would do is also just track all of your receipts or all of the costs or invoices that you're spending. And that would be your expenses. So, of course, the ideal is that your income is higher than your expenses so that you're within your budget. So, step 3 is fundraising. So, every budget requires an income stream. Unless the organizers pay out of pocket, fundraising is essential, and most conferences obtain money from sponsors. This is a really, really critical element of the budgeting and finance, because it's very unlikely that you're going to have an organizing team that can pay for all of this themselves. That might make the legal question very different for them. Most model simulations will obtain money from sponsors. So, who are sponsors? Sponsors can be a variety of organizations. Actually, I'll just stop and sip some water. So, sponsors can be a variety of organizations. They can be, for example, massive international businesses. They can be universities. They can be think tanks. They can be NGOs. They can be your local cafeteria. And they are people who essentially provide a service or good or remuneration or money in some kind to you in exchange for something from you during your conference. Usually, it's either in cash or in kind. And what that means is either a sponsor will pay a certain amount of money to you, which goes directly into your income stream. And then in return, you provide a variety of awareness. So you might provide advertising, as in they're named in the marketing, they're noted as a sponsor. It might be that, at the end of every YouTube video, when they're noting all their Patreon, that's essentially what you do in the marketing. You're noting your patrons, you're noting your sponsors. It might be that they have a visible space at your conference. For example, they might have a room set aside for them. And in that room, they can set up their own booth. And then, so say your model simulation is about sustainability, the European Green Deal. And then, so say you might have an NGO or a think tank in your conference who is dedicated to that subject area. And then the people at your conference might be students who might want to graduate and go into that area. So they have increased knowledge and awareness of this NGO or think tank. And then potentially they might want to go and work for them afterwards. So the sponsor is getting something back in terms of awareness and knowledge sharing of their organization and what they stand for. So those are sponsors, and then it's like in cash or in kind. we've talked about in cash, which is where you provide money. In kind is where there's, a quid pro quo, as in you're giving in kind. And so in exchange for this kind of marketing, awareness raising that you're providing, they will provide some kind of visible goods and services to you. So for example, this could be that they help you secure a venue. It could be that they provide the catering. It could be that they provide the labels or some kind of goods that you need. Or it could be that they provide actual food and drink. Like you could just have 500 cans of Red Bull, for example. So there's all different kinds of in-kind, and it can really vary in scope as well. For example, when you're researching the area where you want your venue to be, it might be a good idea to kind of research local businesses around and see, okay, do you want to provide, say, free coffee to us in exchange for, marketing and advertisement? Do they want to provide any kind of like free transport or free travel tickets to the participants in exchange for marketing awareness raising? So it can really vary in scope. So those are the different types of sponsors that you can have. And then the second question is, what are sponsorship packages? Because just as the sponsors vary in scope, what you can provide to them also varies in scope. And here I would just like to say again that we have written resources on the Slack, which go into this in much more detail and are broken down. So I would encourage everyone to go onto the Slack and take avail of all the excellent resources that we have prepared for you. But we have a very basic image on the next slide that will just give the idea to you. So this is one of our examples of the varying scope of a sponsorship package. So it could be that at the bronze tier, you're only giving a very limited selection, and this increases in scope when you go up to silver, gold, platinum. And that's not only good for sponsorships which just have like different levels of what they can give you, but it's also good for a negotiating tactic where you might be encouraged to say, well, hey, okay, if you want to give us more, we have this package which might be even better for you. So there's different levels to play it out, and I would encourage everyone to really do a lot of research into sponsorships. It is a very difficult thing to do. However, it is really essential for raising income, which is essential to your budget and to the success of your model simulation. But it's also a really critical skill for your career. So if you are a student, for example, whether in high school or university, or a recent graduate who is still working on their skills and their CV and are in the very early stages of their career, the skills you learn through organizing model simulation can be really essential to your personal and professional development. Not only are you learning the soft skills of negotiation, conflict resolution, relationship building, but you're also learning the hard skills of financial budgeting and financial organizing. And part of this is looking for sponsorship. So if you can successfully organize a model simulation and successfully obtain sponsors, those are amazing feats that will be really critical to put in your CV and will attract you to a future job or career opportunity. So, how do you reach out to sponsors? How you would reach out to sponsors is through a variety of methods. It really is important to do all your research. So as I've said before, when you're choosing your venue, your ideas, your themes, it might be that you want to go into certain policy areas. So it would make sense if you choose sponsors which are aligned with those specific areas they would be interested in you, in your potential participants, and equally so, you would be interested in them, as they would be aligned with the ideas and themes of your conference. It might also be that you want to reach out to certain sponsorships for what they can give you. For example, as I mentioned before, local businesses around the area who are really aligned with specific things that you need. But how do you reach out after you've done all your research, obtained the contact, and drawn up a list? Is that you might want to write an email, you might want to write a letter, you might want to call them. And it's really essential to really tailor your approach to them. But do have a draft for all the sponsors, but really tailor and give it that kind of, this is the personal connection between my model simulation and your business, university, NGO, like what we can provide. So that is step 3. So now we're moving on to considerations, and this is quite an important section also. So the first one is your legal liability and, your taxes. So the first step for your organization, which you go in the first step of your financial strategy in idea and conception, which is identifying who is liable. So the question there is, are you well-established organization, or are you just starting out for the first time? If you're already established, you likely know your legal liability already, and this can come in a few different forms. For example, if you're a high school club or a university club, then it's very likely that you have an agreement with your educational institution. So they will accept a liability for you in return that you act under their umbrella. This might mean that you were obliged to kind of submit all of your budgets and all of your receipts to the university or school by the end of the year. It might also be that you're obliged to spend all the money that you receive by the end of the year, and you're not actually allowed to hold anything back in reserve, because the excess money would just go into the educational institution's coffers. So it's really essential to have that known at the start. It might make you more spend for. It might make you more liable to spend things if, for example, you know that none of the money can actually be reserved, but you have this limited amount from the university per se. It might also be that you're not under any kind of umbrella, and that your organization is liable for itself. So what this means is that you might have to file some kind of taxes or anything, and that's really based on your domestic scenario. So say, are you registered as an NGO in Belgium? Are you registered as an NGO in any other country? There's different laws which will apply. So it really depends on your domestic situation. But number one, at the start, identify who is liable. Also identify who has access to the bank account. That's really critical. It might be the previous year's organizers are the ones who have access to the bank account, but it might be that you have to get them involved in order to access it. So ideally, ownership or access should be transferred every year if you're a well-established organization. So that's a first legal obligation to consider. The second one is financial ethics and codes of conduct. And this is really critical as well to protect your reputation, because how are you going to get sponsors? It's through having a good reputation, that they know they can trust you, that they can trust your organization, that you are going to spend this money on organizing a model simulation, and you're not going to go fleeing off into the sunset with their money or goods or services through. I mean, I don't know what I would do if, if I was scamming this like local business out of 500 cans of Red Bull. What am I going to do with it? It's for my conference, trust me. But anyway, to protect your reputation, it might be a good idea to establish a financial code of conduct. And this might be a list of, promises that we will be trustworthy, we will spend our money right. It might include transparency. It might be that to your local community, you will publish a transparent version of what you've spent the money on. It might also be that you have certain sponsors that you wouldn't consider accepting a sponsorship from, and to protect your reputation and promote your own ethics, you would say in this code of conduct that there are these sponsors that we will not accept any sponsorship from. And that also just tells the community who you are and what the organization stands for and the values. And that also improves your reputation for obtaining sponsorships. The third legal obligation is also about defining the status of the organization. And just like I've said before, if you're already well established, this will be known. But if you're just starting out, then it's essential to define this early on as possible, because if you want to change it later on, it's very, very difficult. It takes a long time. And that is not-for-profit versus for-profit. So in a not-for-profit organization, all of the profit gained goes back into the organization. It doesn't go back into the organizer's pockets per se. But that also is a very general statement with a lot of nuances. For example, if you're not for profit under the liability of someone else, it might be that you're not allowed to keep any money, so you have to spend it all that you've raised on the conference. Or it might be that in the not-for-profit, all of the money that you have that's in excess, it just goes back into the bank account to either help for next year's costs or to assist with any cost during the year. For example, hosting a website domain will incur costs throughout the year. So that's a crucial part of not-for-profit, where none of the organizers will be spending their own personal money, but everyone will be spending the money of the organization. And the understanding is that no one is going to be personally profiting. But ideally also, the flip side is ideally no one will incur a personal loss, which is why it's really essential to have excess money for any emergencies. So that's not for profit. This is versus for profit, which is where the conference is run, where the excess money will go back to the organizers. And it's also very essential to define who exactly will be receiving that money, whether it will be all the organizers or say just one of the organizers. In a for-profit, that has to be clearly defined. And this can incur its own different set of problems when creating budgeting. For example, in a for-profit, it may be that there's one organizer who is the main driving force and they have a lot more money to put in. So they might be able to put in a large amount of like their own money, but then they would expect to see a return on this by the end of the conference. So it may be that the participant fees are higher, or it may be that you can go to more expensive places, but this is in anticipation of a return, which is why the participation fees might be higher, or potentially they might be able to drum up higher sponsorships. But so those are the two differences, not-for-profit versus for-profit. And I think from my own personal experience, most model simulations are not for profit that I have engaged with or been to, but it varies dramatically globally. And it's just really important to define it as early on as possible because it's a legal status and it impacts your liability. It impacts whether or not you pay, what type of taxes you pay. So it's really important to define that as early on as possible. So we're moving on to the last considerations, which are your voluntary considerations. And so at the very beginning, when you're in the planning stage, you've done your budget and you're trying to estimate all your costs, something you might want to consider is having financial scholarships. And this is for an equality perspective, because say if you're organizing a high school or university model simulation, most of your participants may be people who don't have a job, or they actually don't have any kind of source of income to themselves. So it might not be that they are able to pay the fee to be a participant. So that's one element. It might also be that you're organizing a conference and you want to give a scholarship to people who are disadvantaged or from disadvantaged communities where they just might not be able to pay in that way. Or it might be that you're organizing a massive international conference and the currency conversion is very dramatic between one country and another. And so a participant coming to your country, for example, might be at more of a disadvantage just because of that currency conversion. So from a perspective of equity of outcome, having a financial scholarship is really crucial to ensuring diverse perspectives and that everyone from all different types of backgrounds can participate. Another consideration is how eco-friendly and sustainable you want your conference to be. It may be that you're going into it with say, your idea or the policy that you're debating is very on that topic. It would make sense if the rest of your conference and the themes that you're discussing are reflected in the financial decisions that you're taking. So it might be that you don't have any paper, that all of your negotiation documents are online. It might be that there's no renewable resources used, and there's no thrown away resources such as coffee cups, for example. It might also be that you decide to go for catering, that all of the participants' meals are catered in order to reduce waste. Or it might be that you make sure that everyone is getting around the city on public transport instead of taking taxis. So there's a variety of different ways that you can mainstream these concerns into the financial decisions that you're making, and this should be reflected in your financial strategy. This can be more cost effective if done right. And once again, I will say that this is just a very general guide to get you started. So I would encourage you to do more research into the details and analysis of how you can make your conference more sustainable. There are further resources linked in our written resources. So I encourage everyone once again to go to the written resources on the MAB Slack, where you will see this in all further detail. So, and then you come to what happens after the conference is over. And this wrap-up period, once again, is really essential. So it's the day after the party, and you're looking around at everything, and you're like, okay, we got to clean this all up. And that's you. Once you've reached the end of the conference and you're looking at your financial strategy, you're looking at your budget, and you're saying to yourself, we have to tie it all together. And what that means is collecting all the receipts, finalizing the budget, seeing if you went over or under, making sure that anyone is reimbursed from the organizers' coffers if they did spend any of their personal money, which ideally they wouldn't. And making sure all of the knots and crosses are tied and everything's wrapped up. This is really essential because also you might have to submit your taxes, you might have to submit your budget to your educational organization, and doing all of that makes it easier for next year's participants. So you're giving them that good standing, you're giving them that legacy to hold on to. It might also be, and this is the worst case scenario, that you vastly went over your budget and now you are in debt. And then you also have to come together as an organizing team and decide what you're going to do about that. And it's really essential to have the organizing team together to discuss that, so no one person is just left with the bill. It's like, you're at the dinner table and you had a good meal with all your friends, but then everyone else left, and then one person is left with the bill. It's not great. But to reframe it in a positive mindset, it really is just giving it to the next generation and ensuring that either this well-established conference can go on or that this new conference can be continued on for a second edition. Okay, so we have reached the Q&A and further resources section. I would just like to remind everyone once again that there is an excellent finance and budgeting guide on the MAB Connect Slack, which I encourage you all to go and investigate and to read. And if you have any questions, either later on, you can always email me. I would also appreciate any questions now. But I would just like to take a moment to thank everyone for your patience, for how well you've listened during this presentation and this training session. And I would like to thank not only the rest of the MAB team for being wonderful organizers that have really assisted me in helping with the preparation throughout this whole process, but also to all the model simulations that I've been involved with, because I think it's a fantastic community of people who are really seeking to educate themselves, to pass it on to the next generation, and to really debate these really crucial ideas for youth engagement. I'm really, really happy that I'm part of this community and that I can give back. And I would also like to remind everyone that Runners Across Borders organizes a yearly summit, and ours will be coming up next year. So keep an eye out for that. So thank you very much, and I am open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ciara. So a little round of applause for Ciara there. For the resources and for the training, they're really, really fantastic. And, I can definitely tell you for a fact, I wish I had those when I was starting off all those years ago as a young MUNer. I might, if you forgive me, I might make a few, not additions, but sort of reflections on the training as well. Firstly, I just want to say that, please do check out MAB Connect. For those of you who might be watching this a bit later, it will also be on our website, of course, in due course. So you'll be able to find it there along with this wonderful training. And I think, if there's one thing I think I'd like people to take away from it, it's also that in-kind can be very powerful. I think for many of us in Western Europe, and indeed in Europe, I'd say more broadly, a lot of MUNs and simulations are run in cooperation with universities, whereby almost everything related to the simulation, so the accommodation, the printing, the resources, sometimes even the socials, sometimes even the catering is in some way subsidized or provided in kind from the university. And if you look at this from a sponsorship perspective, it makes sense because the university can show it's supporting its students, who are normally the organizers. It's also attracting new students. I partially chose one of my master degree studies based on my knowledge through Model UNers. Both of my master degree choices, actually, if you think about it, one of which is where I met Ciara. And I think that can be very, very powerful. So I think some people, especially if they're starting off, might look at this, might stress, where do I find these sponsors? Your educational institution of choice is almost always the best bet. And really try and take that up until the very end. And overall, I would be surprised if not. I can say from experience, it isn't always the same in Africa or Asia. The sort of understanding of higher education be a little bit different. But across Europe, across North America, Australia, and indeed South America too, your higher education institutions are also a big part of that. So that was just a small addition I wanted to add. But again, Ciara, amazing work. I have a question for you then. Fine, I will fire one. Well, can you give us an example of a really tough bit of either fundraising or budgeting that you faced when you were sort of organizing a conference, and sort of how did you try and get over that situation? So I think financing can be stressful, and I think it's always good for people to understand a time when someone else overcame it so successfully, which I'm sure you did.
Great. Thank you very much, Philippe. I would also like to add, just to make a comment about the choosing your education, is that I also choose my master's based on the simulation game that they had at it. And it was really my experience of Model EU that really led me to my current career in international relations and got me started. So really, simulations can really define your life choices, such as that. If I hadn't gone to that master's, I wouldn't have met Philippe and I wouldn't be here as colleagues in this wonderful organization. However, to address your question, so when I was in university, this is going to be a non-model simulation example, but it will be relevant. When I was in university, I was 19 and I decided to set up my own student society. And it was called the Current Affairs Society to discuss current affairs. And that what I faced is what I think a lot of people might face if they're starting a model simulation for the first time, is that I was starting from scratch and I had absolutely no idea how to do fundraising. And I was reaching out to a few local organizations and desperately doing research. So what I would do is, just as Philippe said, the university was really helpful in providing venue space, for example. But I also learned the value of really tailoring what we're talking about to specific sponsors. So, for example, we ran a debate on an issue around Brexit, and so there were some specific Brexit NGOs who wanted to sponsor and come along to the debate. So that's the value of using the resources that you already have, and then also making sure it's tailored to the event that you're running. It was a good learning experience. So I would say for that, it was character development. Thank you.
That's a lot of this for sure. Thank you, Ciara. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add from your experiences as well, or questions to Ciara?
Yeah, I actually, one experience just came to mind. I was on the board of a student organization again, and our sponsorship or partnerships commissioner decided to quit at a very crucial point of our board year. So we were left without anyone to do finances and partnerships, and without anyone to raise money. And we had €0. And what that really taught me was that it's actually not as hard as it sounds to raise or to acquire thousands of euros in a relatively short amount of time if you have some good negotiation strategies, if you have a good plan and a high enough target, and if you are not afraid to ask for kind of a lot of money. Yeah, it taught me that you shouldn't be scared to ask big rich companies for a lot of money, because they have it, and they have budgets specifically set aside for this kind of stuff. So that was just a really good experience for me. Yeah, I don't know if there are no other questions. Maybe I can wrap it up, or if you want to say anything.
They're saying come to uni to find out how to get rich quick. In only 30 days, you too can raise thousands of euros. It's a good point, though. It is a good point.
It was 60 days, but still.
60 days. All I'm saying is that's a marketing guidebook right there. That's the next training session. It's just uni going how to make thousands of euros in 60 days.
For sure.
Before you know it, will be an LMM.
Exactly. Oh my God. Don't tempt me. Do not tempt me. You know, financing for this NGO is already.
Great. Are there any other questions from the audience? Just looking at the chat. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Or just email me.
Exactly. I think, you know, it's important to note we are all contactable. This is
Yeah.
our first of many trainings. Maybe before we leave, Ciara, do you want to say a little something about the next training session?
Yes, thank you very much.
And then you
So-
can wrap up and then we'll end there.
Great. So, thank you all for being here at the first training session of autumn 2024. However, there will be a second training session, and it's going to be on diversity, equality, inclusion, accessibility, and it will take place on December 10th on Human Rights Day worldwide. So, fitting in with the theme. So once again, it's going to be a training session and there will be a resource attached. So I encourage you all to come along, or if you're viewing this from the future, to click on the next video and enjoy. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ciara. This was super insightful, and yeah, I learned at least a couple of new things about financing budgeting myself. I'm sure many others did as well. Yeah, like Philip mentioned, this is just the first of many, so definitely stay tuned on our channels on Instagram, LinkedIn, or our website for our future events in general, but also training specifically. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the day.